Hi, I'm Sydney.
I'm Jake.
And this week we're going to continue our special series on the 40 years of Neo-Noir. We're moving from the bleak and washed out 1970s to the neon-drenched world of the 1980s. So, are you ready? We're going to jump right in. We each are about to present mostly under the radar movies, are movies that might have just slipped out of consciousness, except for Body Heat.
Yeah, let's get that out of the way. Body Heat from 1981, written and directed by Lawrence Kasdan, starring William Hurt, Kathleen Turner, and Richard Crenna. So basically, in the midst of a searing Florida heat wave, a woman persuades her lover, a small-town lawyer, to murder her rich husband. And, that's that's the trope we've seen a lot. But this movie is friggin' intense. And one of the reasons it was is well known is it has a crazy sex scene that was so well written in the screenplay that apparently the screenplay was just being passed around in Hollywood because people just all wanted to read the sex scene because it was so well written.
Have you read the screenplay?
I have not.
Oh.
I just read the story somewhere. It's also, I think, a unique role for Kathleen Turner because she's usually a protagonist, and here she is a real dark femme fatale. Before I forget, she's going to be on season 3 of The Kominsky Method as Michael Douglas's ex-wife.
Oh, perfect. How perfect is that?
Yeah. But yeah, this movie, I mean, it's super noir. It's an excellent thriller. Definitely watch it.
It's like what the movies in the 40s would have been, the noirs of the 40s, if they could have had sex in them.
And it's set in like the Florida heat. And like everyone's always sweating in that movie,
Yeah.
and it really adds to the tension.
Like you feel hot too.
Yeah.
In more ways than one.
The heat.
Okay, is it my turn?
Yeah.
Okay, so for my first pick, I have 52 Pickup, directed by John Frankenheimer, based on a story by Elmore Leonard, starring the great Roy Scheider and Anne Margaret, John Glover, Kelly Preston, and do you have this on your list?
I don't. Is this the guy who wrote Jackie Brown, or is this the guy who wrote?
This is the guy who wrote Jackie Brown.
All right, good.
Yes. And this movie follows a plot to blackmail a wealthy industrialist, Henry Mitchell, played by Scheider, who's married to an aspiring politician played by Anne Margaret. And Henry has been caught having an affair with a much younger woman, the very young, very, very young Kelly Preston.
Ooh.
Yeah. And when Harry doesn't play by the rules of the blackmailers, it triggers an escalating chain of unimaginable violence.
Yeah, I've seen this movie pop up on Amazon Prime. I think it's free right now, and I've been thinking about watching it, and now maybe.
I think Roy Scheider's performance, I mean, I love him anyway, but his performance in this is what kind of makes it sells the movie. It has a lot of those 70s sensibilities carried over. And of course, I love LA stories. And this story takes place in LA. And there's some actual real contrast in this one between the glamorous money side of LA and these gritty, seedy, exploitative, dirty underbelly of the city with like prostitutes and girly bars. And it shows kind of how these two things are how these two parts of the city clash together.
All right. My next film is 1981's Nighthawks, starring Sylvester Stallone, Rutger Hauer, and Billy D. Williams. Have you ever seen that?
Mm-mm.
So Sylvester Stallone plays a very conservative street cop who agrees to go after an international terrorist, played by Rutger Hauer, who is demanding immediate attention. So the terrorist keeps escalating his acts of terror to get what he wants, putting Sylvester Stallone's very conservative tactics to the challenge. And it's kind of like a cat and mouse game. Stallone teams up with Billy D. Williams to track down Rutger Hauer. And it's a really good role for Stallone because I think he's known for like Rambo and Rocky and a lot of like the pure action stuff. But here he's a cop on the edge. So if you want to get back on the Stallone train, watch Nighthawks.
Okay, so my next one's kind of a cheat. It's from 1990, Cast a Deadly Spell, and it stars Fred Ward, Julianne Moore, David Warner, and Clancy Brown. It's set in the 1940s Los Angeles, but it's like 1940s Los Angeles that exists in like another dimension, basically, because the entire population has supernatural powers. And an affluent businessman played by David Warner hires a private investigator, Harry Philip Lovecraft, get it, to track down an ancient text. Harry's simple task becomes complicated when he realizes that the missing text is the key to taking over the world. And I really like this one because it takes all the tropes of noir, the noir detective, and blends them with fantasy elements. It's almost over the top, but not quite. And I really like it. I think it does a good job of creating a believable, pulpy 1940s LA just with magic.
Yeah, and one thing you should mention is that Fred Ward's character, he's like the only person in the movie who refuses to use magic.
Yes.
Which is kind of like a central theme throughout, because he's battling these people who are using dark magic, but he's like a sort of like a by the book. I don't mess with that stuff.
Yeah. So you've got the PI with the past. There's a femme fatale, the hunt for one thing that turns out to be a whole host of problems. I love it. I think it's a really good, enjoyable, fun movie.
Yeah, and it's obviously inspired by H.P. Lovecraft material. So if you're a fan of that, you'll get a little taste. It's not as heavy on the horror stuff,
right?
But it has elements. And I've seen it. It's also, I think it was a HBO original movie back in the day.
Yes, yeah, it was.
And while it at times it felt a little campy, I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty entertaining, and I friggin' love Fred Ward, so I'll kind of watch anything with him.
Well, and it's completely different. So I love it when we take a genre or a type of film and it like expands out and incorporates elements from other genres. And
right. Yeah, for sure. It's a clever premise. All right. My next pick is Brian De Palma's Body Double from 1984. And I think this is like a lesser known De Palma movie, and some people might find it a little cheesy, but maybe it's because like I saw when I was a kid and it just like stuck with me. I really like it. It stars Craig Wasson, Melanie Griffith in a fairly early role for her, I think, and Greg Henry, who had a very small part in Black Dahlia as that bookie at the beginning. Craig Wasson plays a young actor who becomes obsessed with spying on a beautiful woman who lives nearby, which leads to a baffling series of events with drastic consequences. One of the high points of this movie is where there's a sequence that ends up being a giant music video for Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Relax. I don't know how to explain it, but it's just like this weird part of the movie. I think it totally works because it's all like this movie is all about like things not being what they seem. Melanie Griffith is really good in it. I think she was at least nominated for like a Golden Globe, but she was nominated for something. Yeah, it's a little over the top even for De Palma, but I really like it. I like Greg Henry a lot, even though he's not like a big actor. He's good in it. It takes place in LA, so maybe that'll interest you. And it's like it feels very Hitchcockian.
My next pick is also set in LA. Like Cast a Deadly Spell, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, is another example of expanding noir. Released in 1988, starring Bob Hoskins, Christopher Lloyd, and Kathleen Turner, who we love. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is cartoon noir. A hard-boiled PI has to investigate an adultery scandal involving Jessica Rabbit, voiced by Kathleen Turner, the wife of the biggest cartoon star there is, Roger Rabbit. But in true noir fashion, the investigation is just the tip of the iceberg. And what unravels is a cartoon equivalent of Chinatown.
Yeah, I saw that as a kid. I remember it blew my mind.
Yeah. This one is like old school. You've got the PI with a chip on his shoulder, the tragic past, the femme fatale with her own secrets. The entire movie is just an homage to film noir. It's fantastic with cartoons. Yeah,
I remember really liking it. It also came out around the same time as, do you remember there's that other movie with Brad Pitt and
oh yeah, Cool World,
which also used the cartoon. That movie bombed.
Yeah,
but I remember that was pretty dark. Maybe it became a cult classic too. But Who Framed Roger Rabbit, definitely great. All right, my next pick is Manhunter from Michael Mann, based on the book Red Dragon by Thomas Harris, starring William Peterson, Kim Grace, Joan Allen, and Tom Noonan and Brian Cox. So this was the first adaptation of Red Dragon. There was a later adaptation starring Ed Norton as Detective Will Graham. Here he's played by William Peterson of CSI fame. And Brian Cox plays Hannibal Lecter. And while Anthony Hopkins is the greatest Hannibal Lecter ever, I think this version of the movie is far superior. Michael Mann brings all his skills. You've got all the cool lighting and shadows. You have long scenes with very few cuts, a lot of panning. You've got a beautiful synth soundtrack that he's known for selecting. And basically, it's about so Will Graham is a former FBI profiler who returns to service to pursue a deranged serial killer named the Tooth Fairy, played by Tom Noonan, who was in Heat, by the way. And it ends up costing him more than he had hoped. So I think this is another great Michael Mann film, and I like it a lot.
Probably should see it, considering all the Michael Mann movies that we've watched. So my next movie, you had one that was sort of Hitchcockian. I also have one that is very Hitchcockian. It's called The House on Carroll Street. It's from 1987, starring Kelly McGillis, Jeff Daniels, Mandy Patinkin, and Jessica Tandy. Now, I remember seeing this movie a million years ago as a kid, and it always stuck with me, mostly because Kelly McGillis's character was just so Nancy Drew-ish. Like, I wanted to be her. So during a time of anti-communist paranoia, Life magazine photo editor Emily Crane, played by McGillis, finds herself called before the House Un-American Activities Committee and is blacklisted. So she takes a job as a companion to an elderly woman whose next door neighbors are up to something fishy and something very un-American. And this movie is so unapologetically old-fashioned. I just love it. It's not sappy, but it is very much something that could have existed in like the 40s and 50s. And Kelly McGillis as the protagonist she's the detective in this one. She's the one who puts the pieces together. She's the one who thinks her way out of dangerous situations. And there's no happy ending on this one. The lack of a happy ending comes as a surprise because it's so old fashioned that you expect that there should be a happy ending.
And we're not in the 70s anymore.
We're not in the 70s anymore. Exactly.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. Sounds interesting. My next pick is Frantic from 1988, directed by Roman Polanski, starring Harrison Ford and Emmanuel Siegner. So in a hotel room in Paris, a doctor comes out of the shower and finds that his wife has disappeared. He soon finds himself caught up in a world of intrigue, espionage, gangsters, drugs, and murder. I've seen this movie multiple times, and I still can't remember what it's about, but I just know it's a great thrill ride. Harrison Ford is really good in it as like this very helpless American doctor who's just like the title says, is frantically looking for his wife and has no idea what he's doing. And I think it's a good role for him, considering like I think he's better known for sort of like the more uplifting action adventure roles, but here he's like in a very dark movie. Emmanuel Siegner is really good as well. She's sort of the femme fatale, but I don't think she was. She's like helping him. I forget why, but she's very mysterious. She's also in another great noir movie, The Ninth Gate, which I think we've maybe talked about briefly before. But this is a really good movie by Roman Polanski. Takes place in Paris. In Paris noir.
Okay, so my final pick is probably my favorite of all the ones on here, and it's called Mona Lisa. It's from 1986. It's directed by Neil Jordan, starring, once again, Bob Hoskins, Kathy Tyson, and Michael Caine. And Hoskins plays George, a small-time crook just out of prison who is reduced to working as a driver for a high-class call girl, Simone, played by Kathy Tyson. When Simone asks George to find a missing girl, George's troubles start to add up, which is, what we've seen over and over again. Don't do favors for people because they spiral out of control. And this is set in very shabby Soho, London, full of girly clubs, sex workers, throngs of prostitutes, sadistic pimps, and young women hanging on the very edge of society. And all the performances here are spectacular. Hoskins won Best Actor at Cannes for this. and was nominated for an Oscar. In this movie, we spend a lot of time getting to know George and Simone and the London sex industry. And then it goes really dark once Simone asks George to do her a favor and find this missing girl. And it's so good. I'm going to say the ending, you might like it, you might not like it, but everything up until that point is fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds like some of those other movies you talked about, like Hardcore and Night Moves, where it's like the guy looking for a missing girl. But yeah, it sounds cool. And Neil Jordan, we discussed him in the Company of Wolves episode. For my final pick, I mean, I love the Coen Brother movies. I think they're geniuses. They're probably like in my top 5 directors. And this is a really good one. It's a really interesting choice from them because it takes place in the Prohibition era. Stars Gabriel Byrne, Albert Finney, John Turturro, Albert Finney, Steve Buscemi. And it's about Tom Regan, played by Gabriel Byrne, an advisor to a Prohibition-era crime boss who tries to keep the peace between warring mobs, but gets caught in divided loyalties.
I forgot about this movie, but yeah, I've seen this. And let me tell you a funny story. Well, maybe not so funny. Is that I wanted to go see a movie, and my mom's like, "Well, what do you want to go see?" And she's like, "Well, let's just see Miller's Crossing." And I was like, 10. So that's what we went and saw. So we saw Miller's Crossing, and I was like, "Ooh, okay, this is heavy."
Yeah, and I think it's one of their lesser known movies, but I would say it's as good as any of the other ones. And they do a really good job of diving into that era. And I know you like historical pieces, so.
I do. I remember liking this. I saw this recently, maybe in the last couple of years. I rewatched this.
Yeah, and it's got a pretty John Turturro is like a real son of a bitch in this compared to some of his other roles. So, yeah. And as far as the Coen brothers, I mean, they had some weaker films like The Lady Killers or Intolerable Cruelty. But
hey, I liked Intolerable Cruelty.
What I was going to say, even at their worst, they're still great. These guys can do no wrong.
Yeah.
They've never had a dud. They've literally never had a dud.
I mean, they might have movies that don't make as much money as other movies, but I mean, even Burn After Reading.
I thought it was. I liked it a lot. Some of the humor in that movie was like some of the jokes. I died. Actually, okay. They had one movie that I guess I didn't like was friggin' Hail Caesar. I bet you like that.
Oh no, I didn't. I couldn't even finish it.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember reading a lot of people liked it. A lot of people in the industry liked it. It didn't click for me. But
yeah, I don't know what it was about that either because it's based on this like the fixer Eddie Mannix, and I read the book The Fixer about Eddie Mannix and all the shit that these Hollywood fixers would do and all the trouble they caused for people's personal lives and all that. And I don't know, for some reason it was just I don't know, it just didn't work for me.
It was a little too cutesy and a little too try hard.
I think that's what it was because I mean, this was some dark stuff they were doing. They were like, hey, this actress, no, bitch, you got to go get an abortion. They like would make them do that. Oh, yeah. No, you're gay. You're marrying this woman. I'm sorry. Like, it's not cute what they were doing. Pumping Judy Garland full of pills. Like, no, that's not cute.
Yeah. So skip that and watch Miller's Crossing instead. Is what I'm trying to say.
Or Burn After Reading.
Yeah. All right. That's it for me.
Join us next week when we move from the 80s into the 90s. I'm Sydney.
And I'm Jake.
And you've been listening to Two for the Matinee.
And if you've got some favorite noir movies from the 80s that we haven't mentioned, tweet at us at 2matinee on Twitter.